This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
African leaders highlight issues that matter most to the continent at the UN General Assembly in New York. South Sudan says it is working towards a federal system of government. And British legislators to return to Parliament after Boris Johnson's suspension was ruled unlawful. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also ahead on the program, banana producers in Africa call on the European Union to maintain tariff on imports from Latin America. And Uganda flags off athletes headed to Doha for the IAAF World Championship. And we begin in New York, where China is urging the United Nations to focus more on developing countries. Beijing once again pushed for multilateralism during a summit on sustainable development.
Leaving no one behind is our shared responsibility. To achieve the SAGs, we must bear in the heart the concerns of developing countries and ensure coordinated economic, ecological, and social development. We must uphold multilateralism and support the central role of the UN in the international system. And we must take effective measures to deepen a global partnership for development.
And African heads of state have also been speaking at the summit. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has called for foreign actors to stop interfering in Libyan affairs. He also pushed for more concerted international efforts to stop armed groups taking control of the country. Egypt strongly backs the Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar, whose forces have been trying to seize the capital Tripoli since April. While the internationally recognized government of national accord in Tripoli is backed by the United Nations. In his speech, President Sisi said Libya needs to be saved from the chaos.
This applies to the protracted crisis in Libya, whose people suffer daily from the scourge of armed conflict. This conflict needs to be stopped. It is time to take a bold and decisive stance to address the root causes of the Libyan crisis comprehensively. This can be achieved by fully committing to implementing the United Nations plan adopted by the Security Council in October 2017.
Meanwhile, the president of Burkina Faso, Roch Marc Christian Kabore, has asked the international community for assistance in the fight against violent extremism. Burkina Faso has suffered major terror attacks in the past, with parts of the country still under a state of emergency. CGTN's Nick Harper reports.
President Roch Marc Christian Kabore told world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly that no country, no matter how powerful it is, can beat terrorism on its own. He said working together in a multilateral spirit was the key to solving the problems and to finding solutions to extremism. He said he applauded the United Nations for standing by his country, considering, he said, it had faced an unravelling humanitarian and security situation. Since 2015, extremist groups linked to Al-Qaeda have carried out a campaign of terror attacks, killing hundreds of people. The president called those attacks unprecedented in scope and said that they had had heavy consequences on both a humanitarian and on an economic level in the country. The UN estimates that almost 300,000 people have had to flee their homes as a result of the violence, and the International Committee of the Red Cross warns 1.2 million people are currently facing food insecurity. Burkina Faso lies within the Sahel region, which has faced increased attacks over the last few years. The UN has set up a special G5 Sahel task force to tackle extremism in Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Chad and Burkina Faso. He also urged the international community to increase efforts to work out a peace plan in Libya, as he said the unrest was impacting his country and the whole of the region. President Kabore commended the recent joint plan with Germany, France and the EU to work together to fight terrorism in the region, adding extremist groups in the Sahel impact not just Africa, but the rest of the world. Nick Harper, CGTN, New York.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari also attended the UN General Assembly. In his remarks, the Nigerian leader urged the international community to invest in Africa and help eradicate poverty.
Current attempts to help develop Africa by industrial countries are uncoordinated and plainly incremental. We have the skills, the manpower, and the natural resources, but in many instances, we lack the capital. Hence my plea for industrial countries to take a long-term view of Africa.
Let's take it up from that appeal there by President Buhari. Now, 1 in 3 Africans, or about 422 million people, live below the global poverty line. This figure represents more than 70% of the world's poorest people. But there is evidence that the tide is turning. According to projections from the World Data Lab, more Africans are now escaping extreme poverty than are falling below the poverty line. CGTN's Robert Nagila has the details.
When it comes to ending poverty, Africa faces particular challenges, among them high inequality and rapid population growth. A tool, the World Poverty Clock, created to measure progress in achieving the first Sustainable Development Goal, eradicating poverty in all its forms, has listed the following countries as having the highest rate of people living with extreme poverty. The Democratic Republic of Congo with 60.9 million people, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Mozambique, Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, and South Sudan with 11.4 million people living with extreme poverty. However, it's not all doom and gloom. According to projections from the World Data Lab, 4 countries have poverty rates of below 3%. They are Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Mauritius and Seychelles, with Mauritania and Gambia expected to join this group by 2030. 6 additional countries whose poverty rates are expected to reach below 5% in that period are Ethiopia, which is projected to lift 22 million people out of extreme poverty, Ghana, Kenya, Angola, Cote d'Ivoire and Djibouti. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's cross over now to Lagos, where CGTN's Deji Badmus is standing by for us. Deji, Nigeria has been cited as one of the countries with huge numbers of poverty levels. Would you say this is a fair assessment?
Well, to a large extent, I would say it's a fair assessment when you consider the fact that Nigeria has the largest population on the continent at about 200 million. And there's no doubt at all that there's rampant poverty in Nigeria. Even the president, too, confirms that. And that's the reason why he says he's made the eradication of poverty his cardinal policy. And it's a reason why the government is carrying out so much investment now in terms of tackling poverty, if you like. So to a large extent, it's the reality in Nigeria. A lot of people are poor. The Statistics Bureau in the country also says that. The last figure it came out with says about 54% or so of Nigerians are living below the poverty line. So I think it's a fair assessment, and that it's just the reality on the ground. And that's the reason why, as I said, the government is rolling out different poverty eradication initiatives now to deal with the problem.
Well, Deji, when President Buhari took office, he pledged to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years. How's that going?
Well, Beatrice, look, he made that pledge in May this year, and the fact is that President Buhari has about 3 or so years to spend in office. So now lifting 100 million Nigerians out of poverty, if that is going to happen, of course, President Buhari would not be there. But it's very important what he does between now to the time when he leaves office in 2023. It's an ambitious target, if you ask me, very, very ambitious. It's not something that is going to be easy to achieve. As we speak today, the government is making massive investment in terms of, he calls it the National Social Investment Program, where it is providing, for instance, conditional cash transfers, providing ad hoc employment now. There's a program it calls the N-Power, N-Teacher, different kinds of programs now through the National Social Investment Program now that the government has actually come up with. Of course, funding is a big issue. I remember last year, the government budgeted about 500 billion naira. Unfortunately, it was not able to raise up to half of that. So key to achieving some of these policies or some of these programs is the availability of funds, is a very big issue. Another thing the government is doing is that as we speak today, it's carrying out one of the biggest school feeding programs on the continent. About 10 million school pupils now are being fed on a daily basis. In that process now, the government is able to provide jobs now for about 90,000 people. I'm talking about the caterers, even the farmers too, where the caterers go to buy their products and all of that. So creating employment through that process. And I also know that the government has what we call the Bank of Industry here that gives out loans, you know, to entrepreneurs. But bottom line is that getting 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years is not going to be an easy job at all. And we need to begin to live like we want to do that. You know, we need to begin to produce things in this country. We can't achieve that if we continue to just consume, Beatrice.
Deji Badmus joining us there from Lagos with that update from Nigeria. Well, let's broaden this conversation, and I'm joined in studio by Dr. Hassan Khaneja. He's the director, the Horn Institute in Kenya. Dr. Khaneja, thank you for joining us on Africa Live. First off, what's your take on President Buhari's plea for international support to help Africa, to help the continent out of poverty?
I think President Buhari is right on point, but the type of help, I think, should not be aid. There is no evidence that aid has ever assisted any country on the continent to grow. What the continent needs today is actually trade and investment and transfer of technology. I think that's going to play a more important role. Now, traditionally, you've had a reluctance by foreign investors, especially to transfer technology, so that you can create local ownership and be able to produce things to actually export and get foreign exchange. I think that dynamic has to change for the continent to move at the speed at which it is supposed to do that.
So the dynamic needs to change on the continent, but global rates of poverty have been cut by more than half over the last 2 decades or so. How is Africa doing, though, in terms of poverty eradication itself?
Yeah, while still there are concerns with regard to poverty levels, remember just about a decade ago, about half the population of the continent actually lived below the poverty line. Today we're talking about a third of that. That's about 25% improvement. That's significant. The challenge, though, is the wealth is not equally shared, and so you have more vertical growth in wealth instead of horizontal. And so certain structural things need to be put in place to make sure that actually no one is left behind, especially in the process of economic growth. Not to mention that the continent, about half of the economies of the continent are among the top and fastest growing economies in the world.
We have seen, though, a lot of interest on African countries in the last decade from major powers like China, like Russia, like India, all investing on the continent. And yet still some African countries are still doing rather badly economically. Why is this the case? Yeah,
first of all, a lot of investments also going in industries like extractive industries, for instance, which doesn't really give much. So most of the time the GDP is not reflected in the pockets and the tables of individuals. However, I think smart investments that is going to make sure that it employs majority of African populations, put them into workforce, but also ensure they put infrastructure in place, I think is going to help. And certain countries such as China, for instance, have been involved in building massive infrastructure projects, which is actually helping a number of countries on the continent and also creating jobs for the local population. But I think African countries need to think a lot smarter with regard to investment and trade with the outside world.
All right, Dr. Khaneja, thank you very much for your insights. Well, let's return to Nigeria briefly. And Nigeria's middle belt is at the epicenter of conflicts sparked by the effects of climate change. Although sporadic clashes between herders and farmers are not uncommon, they have taken a deadly turn. Climate experts say the situation could worsen if nothing is done to address the root causes. CGTN's Deji Badmus has more on that story.
For the better part of last year and up till early this year, hardly did a week go by without a deadly clash between farmers and herders, especially in Nigeria's Middle Belt region. And at the very heart of the conflict is climate change. Faced with severe drought and desert encroachment, herders and their cattle are now migrating from the country's far north to the Middle Belt region, and even much deeper into the south, where vegetations are green and water is available. But that migration is setting them up against farmers.
And unfortunately, people are yet to understand that the cause of this thing is climate change. Because over the years, we've not been hearing of that. So how come? Why in the Middle Belt? Why in the central part of the country that it's happening? It's simply climate change. So we need to understand this thing. Then how the communities too must accept for them to live together and play their roles and also reduce energy use.
The clashes have further been complicated by ethnic and religious sentiments. Finding a solution has been both difficult and controversial. After so much debate over the issue, the Nigerian government recently came up with a national livestock transformation plan to address the country's entire animal husbandry sector and create ranches for grazing. The plan is estimated to cost close to $300 million.
The federal government is to contribute 80% in grants to support states, while states will contribute land, project implementation structure, personnel, and 20% cost of the project. States will determine whether or not they are willing to participate. Federal government did not, and we repeat, did not impose this plan. Participation remains voluntary.
It remains to be seen how workable the plan will be. But some say if given the chance, it could make a major difference in the conflict between herders and farmers.
Then also we need to make people understand that the idea of this land belongs to my forefathers. Those forefathers, where are they today? They are gone. So one day we'll also leave. So the land is still there. You know, we need to have the spirit of accommodating ourselves. And for those of us who are actually being accommodated, we need to play by the rules of the game. You know, we need to create a situation where there won't be any form of lawlessness. We need to live together to understand that these changes in the weather condition affect each and every one of us.
Now, while the National Livestock Transformation Plan could help in stopping the conflict, the remote cause, which is climate change, still has to be addressed. And that, of course, would require more than the efforts of Nigeria alone to deal with. Deji Badmo, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Zimbabwe's capital, Harare, grapples with a water shortage. And anxiety in Cameroon as the country readies for a national dialogue to resolve the Anglophone crisis.
I've learned how to code in a simple way.
Together with other young people, we're able to make this difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
South Sudan's government says it is working towards a federal system of government in the country. Representatives from various levels of government in South Sudan are now discussing the way forward in setting up a federal system. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet.
The South Sudan's peace agreement provides that a new unity government devolves more powers and resources to the state and lower levels of government.
We are doing research on all types of federalism in the world and as well studying our own situation and coming up with documents which will inform the public as to what type of federalism they will have to select.
South Sudan's government is currently running a centralized system. Many here complain of unequal distribution of resources, which they say is resulting into conflicts. They say more needs to be done.
We can have a good document, and if it is not implemented, then the people continue to suffer, because we have had beautiful documents. What has gone wrong? Why are the services not going to the people?
The meeting in Juba brings together members of parliament, international community, civil society groups, and South Sudan's government officials.
South Sudan's new government is scheduled to be formed in November this year, but one obstacle to that formation is the number of states and their boundaries. Whereas all parties may agree that federalism is a popular demand in the country, the current government insists on having 32 states, while opposition groups want the country to have 10 states. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
As Cameroon prepares for a national dialogue later in the month, there are concerns over a flare-up of violence. Earlier this month, President Paul Biya announced a national dialogue that seeks to restore calm following violence that has killed thousands and forced more to flee. CGTN's Will Kistanyabwa reports.
Cameroon's English-speaking region has for the past 3 years experienced deadly violence as separatists clash with security officials. The violence had led to mounting calls for the president to take action to end the violence. Earlier this month, President Biya called for a national dialogue, but many citizens in the English-speaking region remain wary.
I came to buy egg, a tray of egg and some foodstuff because of the lockdown tomorrow. You know, when we need to stock in food for today, because tomorrow we may not have where to buy them.
I'm telling you now, everyone is affected. My car was burnt, and I was not the only one. All my neighbors' cars were up in flames in the early morning incident.
The violence has brought with it devastating economic effects for the residents of the country's Anglophone regions.
Before the Anglophone crisis, you could make a turnover of $8,400 per month. Currently, you cannot make that much. So, it's in free fall.
The national dialogue is set to take place in the capital, Yaoundé. Several separatist and some opposition parties have said they will boycott the 5-day forum. Despite this, many are hopeful that the dialogue will help restore calm.
It is very bad. For 3 years today, we have been suffering. So really, we really need the peace. So we pray that as concerning the dialogue that is coming, we pray that everything should move well so that the peace should reign. And then our country should come as it was before.
The United Nations estimates that about 1,800 people have been killed and more than 530,000 others displaced following the violence in the West African nation. Wilkisanyabo, CGTN.
To Zimbabwe now, and the country's capital is dry after the Harare municipality shut down Morton Jaffrey water plant. It says it does not have enough foreign currency for treatment chemicals. The move has stoked fears of disease outbreaks in some suburbs that have already been facing water shortages because of the drought. CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya with the details.
Patricia Mavimire's laundry has been piling up since water stopped coming out of the taps 3 weeks ago. After some inconvenience, she's finally able to get to it.
I spent the whole night in the queue at the borehole and only got back this morning. But I don't have enough water for all the clothes, so I have to be selective.
Across the road, a neighbor tries to deepen their dried up well. If they keep digging up dirt, they'll have to fetch water from the crowded boreholes. Before the waterworks were shut down, pressure on community boreholes was huge. It's now expected to increase, along with the hazards to the people who live here.
It's a recipe of disaster, especially for the residents of Glenview. As time goes on, we feel cholera is going to come back again and typhoid, and we are going to lose many lives in Glenview.
People here aren't taking any chances.
This will last just 2 days. It's for drinking, bathing, but most of it is for the toilets because we have to be extra careful.
But the danger still lurks.
Here they are taking water, but we are not so sure, 100% sure, whether this water is 100% clear. Because as you can smell, there's a smell of sewer here, and it means the water is contaminated somewhere underground.
The lasting solution to the long-running challenges is to decommission the existing water sources.
Some people have referred to Lake Chibero and Lake Manyame as the septic tanks for Harare. So it's like we're drawing water from our septic tanks and treating it for consumption.
Work to tap into 3 dams identified as potential water sources for the capital has been stalled for several years. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
The British Prime Minister is comparing the Brexit crisis to a Greek tragedy. At the UN, Boris Johnson jokingly compared himself to the mythological Greek god Prometheus, whose tortures, like that of a Brexit, may go on forever. There are only a few weeks before the United Kingdom is expected to leave the European Union. And in the latest twist, the Britain's Supreme Court ruled Johnson's request to suspend Parliament was unlawful. CGTN's Nawid Jabakil has more from London.
Its chambers may be empty, but the UK's historic Parliament is still casting a shadow over Boris Johnson's plans to take Britain out of the European Union. As Johnson rubbed shoulders with world leaders in New York, here at home, the country's highest court ruling the Prime Minister's suspension of Parliament was illegal.
That the decision to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament was unlawful because it had the effect of frustrating or preventing the ability of Parliament to carry out its constitutional functions without reasonable justification.
The decision was reached unanimously by the Supreme Court's 11 judges. That's the maximum number that could hear a case like this. The Prime Minister suspended Parliament on the 10th of September, with lawmakers only set to return to work 5 weeks later. Calling that move null and void, this latest ruling will allow politicians to return almost immediately.
I have instructed the House authorities to prepare not for the recall, the prorogation was unlawful and is void, to prepare for the resumption of the business of the House of Commons. Specifically, I've instructed the House authorities to undertake such steps as are necessary to ensure that the House of Commons sits tomorrow.
The decision by the Supreme Court here in London is likely to add pressure on the Prime Minister, who's already criticised Parliament for weakening his negotiating position with European leaders as he races against the clock to try and secure a Brexit deal. Political tensions already running very high in Westminster, and this ruling is likely to increase the divisions here. More immediately, though, it could mean Mr Johnson has to cut short a trip to New York to deal with yet another crisis at home. The Prime Minister said he disagreed with the ruling, but that his government will respect the judicial process.
For the avoidance of doubt, I have the highest respect, of course, for our judiciary and for the independence of our courts, but I must say I strongly disagree with this judgment. And we in the UK will not be deterred from getting on and delivering on the will of the people to come out of the EU on October the 31st, because that is what we were mandated to do. And we will simultaneously refuse to be deterred from delivering on what I think you would all expect, an exciting, dynamic domestic agenda.
Opposition lawmakers are already calling for him to resign. There's little indication from his camp that he's willing to do so. But today's historic ruling is likely to serve as a reminder to the British leader that in UK politics it's Parliament that's sovereign and that these houses still have great power. Nawid Jabakil, CGTN, London.
And CGTN's Richard Bestake is standing by for us in London. Richard, we do know that Prime Minister Johnson has been forced to return home to face Parliament. What is on the cards today?
It's going to be a busy day, Beatrice. You heard the defiant words of the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson there. No suggestion of resignation, no suggestion of an apology following that historic and what Britain's Fleet Street newspapers are calling crushing ruling from Britain's Supreme Court. He is hunkering down along with others inside number 10 Downing Street. His cabinet member, the leader of the House of Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg, refusing to deny reports that he described the ruling from Britain's highest court as a constitutional coup. But it cannot be said that it wasn't profound and potentially deeply damaging for Boris Johnson's Brexit plan.
Well, Richard, in light of these developments, though, What is the reality of a no-deal Brexit by October? Richard Bestick for us there in London. Apologies for that. You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. Banana producers in Africa call on the European Union to maintain tariffs on imports from Latin America. And Boeing begins compensation to families of victims of two 737 crashes.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
We come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Banana producers in Africa do not want the European Union to cut tariffs on banana imports from Latin America any further. Exporters in Africa, the Caribbean and Pacific have been losing market share since 2009 when the EU agreed to progressively cut tariffs on bananas from bigger growers in Latin America. That reduced the advantage previously enjoyed by ACP growers in mostly former European colonies who have tax-free access to European markets. At a convention in Abidjan, banana industry representatives from Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana urged the European Union not to cut tariffs on Latin American producers below $82 a ton. That rate comes into effect from January the 1st, 2020. Well, the entry of tour company Thomas Cook into administration has sparked the largest peacetime repatriation effort in British history. Passengers have been queuing up at check-in points and counters inside Tunisia's main airport since Monday as they seek ways to continue their holiday. The firm owes Tunisian hotels $66 million for stays in July and August. Data from Tunisia's tourism industry confirms that some 4,500 customers of the fallen firm are still in the country. With an estimated 600,000 people abroad, the tour operator is seeking assistance from governments and insurance firms to bring clients home from places as far off as Cancun, Cuba and Cyprus.
I've had absolutely no information from our tour operator other than what's on their website. We've tried to get hold of them on the telephone, and I've tried emailing them, asking them to just give us an update on the current status of things, but we're still waiting to hear, and I'm hoping that they can find us alternative flights maybe.
There should be some sort of legislation in as much as if a tour, especially within this tourist industry, if an operator can't fulfil its commitments or doesn't look likely to fulfil its commitments financially or to its customers, it shouldn't be taking on more work.
Families of the 346 people killed in two fatal crashes of Boeing 737 MAXs are set to each receive about $144,500 in compensation. 157 people died in March shortly after takeoff in an Ethiopian Airlines flight, 5 months after another 189 died in Indonesia from a Lion Air plane. The compensation money is coming from a financial assistance fund that Boeing announced in July. The fund will begin accepting claims from relatives immediately. Fund administrators say claims must be filed no later than the 30th of November. Boeing is facing multiple lawsuits and federal investigations related to the two crashes. It's still unclear when the fleet of 737 MAX aircraft may be cleared to fly again. On to legal matters now. Google had a good day at the European Union's top court today, as the court ruled that it does not have to remove links to sensitive, discredited or wrong personal data, not just in the EU but around the world too. The judgment came in a case pitting the US tech giant against French privacy regulators. In 2016, France's privacy watchdog fined Google $110,000 for refusing to delist sensitive information from internet search results globally upon request in what is called the right to be forgotten. The European Commission proposed in 2012 that people should have a right to be forgotten on the internet. This policy was watered down by the European Parliament last year in favor of a right to erasure of specific information. China's newest global gateway has officially opened. Beijing's massive Daxing International Airport was declared ready for business today. The new engineering marvel will soon host millions of passengers from all over the world. CGTN's Mark Fonte reports.
我宣布，北京大兴国际机场正式投运。
The new airport is designed to take some pressure off the overcrowded Beijing Capital International Airport, which was the only airport to fly international routes in the Chinese capital until now.
We should clarify the double hub function of both Daxing International Airport and Beijing Capital International Airport. The airport should focus on creating a streamlined transport system which can connect the world. Security is the top priority for the civil aviation industry. The airport should promote efficiency and management standards to provide passengers with more convenient travel.
Han Zheng said efforts should be made to make the new airport an engine for development of the Beijing-Tianjin-Hebei region. The facility welcomes the first flights Wednesday. China Southern Airlines, China Eastern Airlines, and Air China will each send a flagship airplane to take off there. Meanwhile, China United Airlines, Capital Airlines, and Hebei Airlines are expected to have one plane each landing at the airport on Wednesday. Mark Fontes, CGTN.
Well, let's turn to Côte d'Ivoire now, where a young female entrepreneur is breaking new ground in personalized healthcare. She's created a digital bracelet called Moso Health Pass. That bracelet holds a continuously updated electronic health record for individuals, as CGTN's Alexandria Majala now reports.
Côte d'Ivoire's healthcare is set to be revolutionized by the Moso Health Pass. It's an electronic health record that provides a patient's medical history information comprehensively and accurately. The Moso Health Pass was invented by Corinne Utara, who wanted the QR code technology to solve the recurring problem of lack of information on patients that usually causes a delay in their care.
The patient is in the first position in the value chain because it is he who gives the first personal information, because he's the only one to know his allergies. Thereafter, the doctor completes the rest of the information after the consultation. It is this provision that gives credit to the information collected. It is the same for nurses, the pharmacist, and even the insurer who validates the acts. Everyone acts at their level via the platform that is connected to the Moso Health Pass device.
With governments across the globe pushing for ICT trends to be incorporated in various sectors, the Moso Health Pass is also being embraced by health professionals.
With the Moso Health Pass, the consultation becomes very easy. Here is a young lady who has arrived and has the flu. I just gave her a prescription via the platform and she will go straight away to the pharmacy. Upon her arrival with the same data at the pharmacy, the pharmacist will see the prescription that has been given and very quickly she will be served and she can begin her treatment.
Previously, when we went to the clinic, the doctor asked to present the health record. I sometimes forgot it at home. In this case, I had to go back to the house and get it. Besides, there's not all information on the health card. Also, the health card can get lost or torn. In this case, I have to buy another one and start all over again. But since I've been using the Moso Health Pass, I no longer have these problems because all my health information is stored securely.
Although the Moso Health Pass was designed for all social classes, some challenges remain.
Rural populations were the most likely to use the Muso Health Pass. It is true that in some areas there is a problem of connectivity, but we are working to develop other technical means that will soon be implemented so that with all types of phones, whether they are smartphones or not, we can get to type the codes and have access to information. Otherwise, to this day, the good internet coverage available in Côte d'Ivoire makes it possible to satisfy a large part of the rural areas.
La Côte d'Ivoire a quand même bonne couverture internet et on arrive à satisfaire en zone rurale.
According to statistics, life expectancy in Africa has improved from 60 to 70 years between 2000 and 2015, an improvement due in part to innovations such as the Muso Health Pass. The inventor aims to extend this project in the West African sub-regions by the end of 2019. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. Creator of the new Nigerian animated film seeks to diversify Nollywood.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
And moving now to the arts in West Africa, where Nigeria's Nollywood, the world's second largest film, is exploring a new genre of storytelling through animation. Nigeria's animated movie, Malika Warrior Queen, made its first big screen debut over the weekend to critical acclaim at the 8th edition of the Lagos Comic Conference.
Malika Warrior Queen is an animation movie set in 15th century West Africa. It tells the story of a ruler and military commander who struggles to keep the peace in her ever-expanding kingdom. Champion.
I feel like when we talk about the Nigerian animation and comic book industry, and even the video game industry as well too, this is the next frontier. And I feel like we're going to follow in the footsteps of the music industries, where in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see the same impact, not just on the continent, but overseas as well.
The Malika series started as a comic book in 2016. Writer and producer Roy Okupe was inspired to adapt the book to the screen after seeing its growing popularity.
Many Azazians disapprove, not in favor of you supporting King Abbas.
It's a really, really great and very humbling time for me because this is why you do what you do. For people to be excited about Nigerian animation, Nigerian comics, Nigerian superheroes, and that's what we live for.
Malika was produced in 10 months on a budget of $60,000 at the Anthill Studios, a Nigerian-based visual media production company in Lagos.
We need to have Nollywood films become comic books. We need to have Nollywood films become games. We need to have Nollywood become, an animated series. So that's what we are trying to do, and Malika has just proven that.
So what then? Kill an ally?
Okupe sees no reason why animation cannot be the next frontier for Nollywood, and he plans to collaborate with local animators on his next projects. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
And staying in Nigeria, a Chinese businessman based in Lagos has awarded scholarships to a number of Nigerian secondary school students in the grand finale of Season 6 of the Young Ministers Competition Award and Student Sponsorship Ceremony. Hundreds of students have benefited from the program since 2014, and this year, students are gaining much more than prize money. CGTN's Edeji Badmus is in Lagos.
Hundreds of secondary school students, their parents, teachers and Chinese sponsors are gathered here. But awarding scholarship is not the only reason they're here. They're also celebrating Nigeria's 59th independence and also the 70th year anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. The program is co-sponsored by West Africa Overseas Chinese Community Association, Chinese International Enterprises Association in Nigeria, and Chinese Youth Association. And in the past 6 years, over 1,000 students have been awarded scholarships.
Children are the future. I hope when you are growing up, you'll be great talents to build your own motherland. I hope you'll be special envoys of friendship between China and Nigeria.
The scholarship award is also an extension of the friendship and diplomatic partnership between Nigeria and China, as both countries continue to nurture their bilateral relations through art and not just business.
The Chinese people not only come Nigeria, invest and only do business. Both of us, we are like a family. We are, thank God, we are here. So we are working together. We between China and Nigeria. We are also passing our roots. We are pushing, we are cultural.
The Young Ministers competition tests students on their knowledge of current affairs and politics, and the best students get sponsored to a tertiary institution in the country.
The Young Ministers have touched the life of our youth, so many of the millions of them, because in each year we will produce not less than 1,000 young ministers or young commissioners.
They have raised a lot of funds to help the Nigerian students to become the future ministers. I think the Chinese community, they have done a great job to help the Nigerian friends, and this definitely will further strengthen the friendship between China and Nigeria.
During this year's edition of the program, students won prize money from $85 to about $300. One of the students, Eke Funaya, explains what it took to win her a scholarship.
I presented my manifesto as the Minister of Tourism, Art and Culture. I said that if I became the Minister of Tourism, Art and Culture, that I would advocate for the government to tighten the security system within the state in order to ensure the safety of tourists. I will also provide interpreters in order to solve the problem of language barrier within the state.
Secondary school students from 35 schools participated in this year's program. At the end of the day, they don't just earn educational relief, but also benefit from an exchange of Chinese and Nigerian culture through the arts. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. Uganda flags off athletes headed to Doha for the IAAF World Championships.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.